Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the chapter number 6 of class 11th English book. That's a poem, The Listeners by Walter de la Mare. Listeners is a plural noun. It is singular is listener. Listener noun is derived from its root verb listen. By adding alphabets er. Listen means to give attention to a particular sound. And listener is a person, maybe some other creature, who or that gives his attention to a particular sound. In one of my previous lectures, I have explained that we form many nouns from their root verbs by adding alphabets er, like read plus er, reader. Read is a verb, reader is a noun. Teach plus er, teacher. Teach is a verb, teacher is a noun. Listen is a verb, listener is a noun. We have the title listeners, that means plural noun. We have many people, maybe many creatures who give their attention to a particular sound. This poem on the surface looks like a poem about an ordinary human being, about a man, about a traveler who had gone towards a forest to fulfill an appointment, to meet somebody, to meet some people. He goes to the forest, he reaches a house, he knocks on the door of that house, he calls to the dwellers of the house, but nobody comes to meet him, nobody comes to his rescue. He knocks several times on the door, he makes several calls, but no one answers him. No one responds to his calls. And at the end of the poem, the traveler, the human being, the man, comes back on his horse. He leaves that place. So this poem looks like an incomplete poem. A person feels that this poem does not have an organic unity. But the incomplete nature of the poem is highly significant. The incomplete nature of the poem is meaningful. Because on a deeper level, the poem is actually about the unknown and the unknowable. This poem is about the universe, about man's state of isolation in the universe. You know, universe is greater, bigger, vaster than what a man feels about the universe. Man's place in the universe is negligible. A man can neither understand the universe nor connect with it. A man tries to connect with the universe. He tries to establish connections with the universe. A man tries to solve the questions, the issues which he faces in the universe. A man faces many questions in the universe. Some questions arise in his own mind. Some questions are asked by others. Some questions are asked by the nature. Man tries to answer those questions. Man tries to find answers to those questions. But a man is not always successful in finding answers to the questions. In some cases, a person finds a little bit of answers, but in most of the cases and in most of the queries, a man fails to find a satisfactory answer. So this poem is about man's state of isolation in the universe. Man tries to establish connections with the universe, but a man at the end of the day is not able to establish firm connection with the universe. Man is unable to understand the universe, and man can never understand the universe fully. And this poem has an eerie quality. Eerie quality means this poem is strange and frightening. When a person goes through the text of the poem, a person feels shades of horror. Because the words, the vocabulary used in the poem and the scenes captured in the poem are scary, are frightening. I will go through the text of the poem. I hope you'll understand the poem from the text. Is anybody there? Said the traveller, knocking on the moonlit door, and his horse in the silence chomped the grasses of the forest's ferny floor. And a bird flew up out of the turret above the traveller's head, and he smote upon the door a second time. Is there anybody there? He said. But no one descended to the traveller. No head from the leaf-fringed sill leaned over and looked into his grey eyes, while he stood perplexed and still, but only a host of phantom listeners that dwelt in the lone house then stood listening in the quiet of the moonlight to that voice from the world of men, stood thronging the faint moonbeams on the dark city air that goes down to the empty hall, hearkening in an ear stirred and shaken by the lonely traveller's call, and he felt in his heart their strangeness, their stillness answering his cry, while his horse moved, cropping the dark turf, neath the starred and leafy sickle. For he suddenly smote the door even louder and lifted his head. Tell them I came and no one answered, that I kept my word, he said. Never the least stir made the listeners, though every word he spake fell echoing through the shadowiness of the settled house from the one man left away. Aye, they heard his foot upon the sitrap, and the sound of iron on stone, and how the silence surged softly backward when the plunging hoofs were gone. I hope you have understood this poem. Now I'll try to explain the poem stanza by stanza. Is anybody there? Said the traveller, knocking on the moonlit door, and his horse in the silence chomped the grasses off the past's ferny floor. A traveller was on his horse. He had come off his horse. Because he had seen a house, he knocked on the moonlit door. The phrase moonlit door shows that it was night time. During the night time, a traveller came off his horse because he saw a house. He knocked on the door of that house and he made a loud call. Is there anybody? Is anybody there? And his horse, meanwhile, began eating grasses of the forest's ferny floor. Forest's ferny floor. Ferns are types of plants. That's why the phrase forest's ferny floor. Probably that forest was covered with ferns. The horse ate those ferns. He was eating those ferns of the forest's floor, and the traveller, the man, was knocking on the door and calling, is anybody there? And a bird flew up out of the turret above the traveller's head, and he smote upon the door a second time. Is there anybody there? He said. And the knocking on the door disturbed a bird. A bird flew out of its nest. The nest was in a turret, in a sort of hole. The bird came out of the nest and it flew above the traveller's head. And the traveller knocked on the door a second time, and he made a second call. Is there anybody there? But no one descended to the traveller. No head from the leaf in the sill leaned over and looked into his grey eyes, while he stood perplexed and settled. But nobody opened the windows covered with the leaves, fringed with the leaves. Nobody opened the windows, or we can say nobody opened the doors for the traveller. Nobody asked him why he was knocking on the door, whom he wanted to meet. And the traveller, the man, he stood there for a moment, motionless. He was settled. He was perplexed. But only a host of phantom listeners that dwelt in the lone house then stood listening in the quiet of the moonlight to that voice from the world of men. Nevertheless, in the house there were some creatures, if not human beings, some creatures, phantom-like creatures, sorts of spirits, ghosts. Those ghosts, those spirits, those phantoms, they stood in the house, in the moonlight. They listened to that voice from the world of men. That means the dwellers of the house, the creatures dwelling in the house at the time, they listened to the voice from the world of men. They listened to the traveler's call, traveler's knocking, stood thronging the faint moonbeams on the dark stair that goes down to the empty hall, hearkening in an air stirred and shaken by the lonely traveler's call. The dwellers of the house, the ghosts, the phantoms, the spirits, they stood around the faint moonbeams on the dark stair, on the stair that goes down to the empty hall. They stood listening to what the traveler was calling loudly. They listened to the knocking on the door. They listened to the stir produced in the air by the lonely traveler's call. And he felt in his heart their strangeness, their subtleness answering his cry, while his horse moved cropping the dark turf neath the starred and leafy sky. And the traveler realized that the dwellers of the house were strange creatures. They did not answer him, they did not respond to the traveler, they did not come to his rescue. And their silence, their stillness was also a sort of answer for the writer, for the traveler. And meanwhile, his horse continued to eat the grass on the dark turf. Dark turf. Why dark turf? Because it was night time. Neath the starred and leafy sky. Taru bare or pattu bare asman ke niche. Starred sky, we understand, it was night time. Leafy sky, in a forest, when a person looks at the sky, a person feels that the leaves of the trees are just in the sky. That's why the phrase starred and leafy sky. Pattu bare और तारू बरे आसमान के नीचे घोड़ा घास खाता रहा. For he suddenly smote the door even louder and lifted his hand. Tell them I came and no one answered, that I kept my word, he said. Now for the third time, the traveler, he lifted his hand, he knocked on the door aloud. He knocked on the door for the third time and he made a louder call. Tell them I came, but no one answered, that I kept my word, I fulfilled my promise. Now the least stir made the listeners, though every word he spake fell echoing through the shadowiness of the little house from the one man left away. But now the least stir made the listeners. वो listeners, सुनने वाले, टस से मस नहीं हुए. The listeners, the dwellers of the house, the phantom, the ghost, the spirits, they did not move at all. The calling by the traveler, the knocking by the traveler did not produce any effect on them. They did not move from their places. Though they listened to every word, every sound made by the traveler. The traveler's words, his knocking, echoed in the house. The man's voice echoed in the house, but the dwellers of the house did not respond to him at all. They heard his foot upon the citra and the sound of iron on stone. And when the traveler was finally exhausted, he got on his horse when he rested his feet on the citra. Citraps are sorts of footrests on the either side of saddle. Saddle, is kept on horse for smooth rides. Citraps are sorts of footrests. And when the traveler got on his horse, he rested his feet on the citraps. The dwellers of the house heard that sound. They even heard that sound. And the sound of iron on stone. The sound of iron on stone refers to the sound made by the hoofs of the horse when it runs or when it gallops. The hoofs of the horse are set with iron. When a horse runs on stones or at any other place, a different sound comes out. And the dwellers of the house heard that sound as well. When the horse began galloping away from that place, the dwellers of the house listened to that sound as well. And how the silence surged softly backward when the plunging hoofs were gone. And the dwellers of the house, the phantoms, the ghosts, the spirits, they also realized how silence had come slowly towards that house, towards that spot. When the plunging hoofs were gone, when the horse had run away from that place, galloped away from that place, the dwellers of the house realized each and everything, but they did not